The kid behind the counter strummed the guitar once. Open strings, no chord, just a flat drag of his thumb across all six, and made a face. Yeah, old guitar. Needs new strings. Action's high. I can do $15. Emmett Tull stood on the other side of the counter. 80 years old, the tan canvas ball cap from the Paducah River Museum gift shop his late wife June had bought him in 2011 pulled low over his eyes, the old acoustic guitar lying flat on the glass between them, and watched a 22-year-old in an A1 pawn polo look at the instrument his father had played on the front porch every evening for 40 years and see $15 worth of beat-up wood. "That was my daddy's," Emmett said, quiet. The kid, Tucker by the crooked name tag, shrugged and leaned the guitar against the side of the counter by the neck, letting the body rest on the linoleum floor. "Sure, 15. Final." Here's what that kid in the pawn shop didn't know. Here's what nobody in that shop knew. The beat-up acoustic guitar Emmett Tull had just set down on that counter was worth $287,000. It was a 1939 C.F. Martin & Company D45, serial number 75269. Between 1933 and 1942, Martin made a total of 91 D45 guitars. 91 in 10 years. Then they stopped. The D45 was the top of Martin's line, the guitar Gene Autry had ordered in 1933, the guitar that defined what an acoustic guitar could sound like. In the years since, surviving pre-war D45s had become the single most valuable production acoustic guitars in the history of American instrument making. The last comparable example had sold at a Heritage Auctions instrument sale in Dallas in 2019 for $312,000. Emmett's father, Grover Tull, had bought this guitar used for $35 at Shacklett's Music on Broadway in Paducah in 1953. He had not known what it was. He had known it sounded good. He had played it on the front porch of the house on Jefferson Street every evening from 1953 to 1993. 40 years, 4 seasons, the same porch, the same chair, the same guitar. He had played hymns and Hank Williams and a little Merle Travis because Merle Travis was from Muhlenberg County, 60 miles south, and Grover felt a kinship. He had died in 1995, and the guitar had leaned against the wall in Emmett's hall closet for 29 years. This is the story of how Emmett Tull walked into a one-pawn on a Wednesday morning in January with $930 of trouble in his head and walked out with the discovery that his quiet, tobacco-farming, porch-playing father had been holding $250,000 in his lap every evening for 40 years and had never known and never needed to know because the guitar had sounded good, and that was enough. Before I tell you what happened when the expert walked through that door, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Now let me tell you about Emmett. Emmett Grover Tull was born in 1944 in Paducah, Kentucky. His father, Grover Tull, had farmed 22 acres of dark-fired tobacco on a rented plot in McCracken County from 1938 to 1979 and had supplemented the farm income by driving a school bus for the county for 31 years. His mother, Opal, had cooked at the Paducah Tilghman High School cafeteria for 26 years. Emmett went to Lone Oak High, graduated in 1962, did 4 years in the Army, 2 at Fort Campbell, 2 in Germany, came home, and spent 36 years at the Paducah Gaseous Diffusion Plant as a pipe fitter. Married June Bolin in 1968. One son, Grover, named for Emmett's father, now 55 and living in Louisville. June had died in 2023 of ovarian cancer, 5 months from diagnosis to the end. The truck was the problem. The 2000 Ford Ranger, the truck June had told him to buy because the old Chevy was going to leave him on the side of US 60, had thrown the timing chain in December. The mechanic at Sutherland's on Broadway had quoted $930 for the chain, the tensioner, and the labor. Without the truck, Emmett couldn't get to the VA clinic in Marion, or to the Kroger, or to the First Baptist Church on Jefferson, where he'd been a deacon for 34 years. His plant pension was $1,620 a month. Social Security added $2,140. After property taxes on the small frame house on Jefferson Street, insurance, electric, gas, his heart medications and the diabetes medications, and groceries, he had about $120 of slack in a good month. He did not have $930. He could have called Grover Jr. in Louisville. Grover Jr. was a warehouse manager for UPS, good benefits but not great money, with 2 kids, one at Murray State, one starting community college in the fall. Emmett had not asked his son for $1 in 20 years. He was not going to start over a timing chain. For 14 days, he walked the mile to the Kroger and caught rides to church with his neighbor Kenny Phelps and missed one VA appointment. On the 15th morning, Wednesday, he went to the hall closet. The guitar leaned against the back wall of the closet, behind his winter coat and June's winter coat that he had not moved. It was in a soft black gig bag Grover had sewn himself from canvas in 1954 because the guitar hadn't come with a case when he bought it. The zipper was broken. Emmett unzipped what would unzip and slid the guitar out. It was a dreadnought, the big flat-top body shape that Martin had more or less invented in the 1930s. The top was Adirondack spruce, aged to a deep honey amber. The back and sides were Brazilian rosewood, so dark it was nearly black at the waist. The neck was mahogany, the fingerboard ebony, the tuning machines open-geared Grover Rotomatics that Grover had installed himself in 1967 to replace the originals that had stripped. The binding was white ivory with, and this was the detail that Dr. Falk would later say had made her heart rate change, abalone pearl inlay along the top edge. The headstock bore the C.F. Martin & Company stamp in gold. The pickguard was tortoiseshell celluloid, cracked at one corner. The finish had checking, a web of fine hairline cracks across the entire surface that came from 70 years of temperature changes. There were pick scratches below the sound hole. There was a small dent on the lower bout where Grover's belt buckle had worn a shallow depression into the spruce over 40 years of playing. The guitar had not been played in 29 years. The strings were dead. The action, the height of the strings above the fretboard, had risen as the neck had slowly bowed under decades of string tension. But the body was solid. The bracing inside was intact. The sound, if you put new strings on it and tuned it, would still be the sound Grover Tull had listened to on the porch every evening for 40 years. A sound that people who know acoustic guitars describe as the voice of God clearing his throat. Emmett had not played guitar. He had never learned. He had listened to his father play from the kitchen table, doing homework through the screen door for the entire duration of his childhood, and he had loved the sound without ever wanting to make it himself. Grover had told him about the guitar exactly once, in 1972, sitting on the porch in the late afternoon with a glass of iced tea. "I bought that guitar at Shacklett's in '53, Grover had said, $35. Old man Shacklet said it had been in the shop for 2 years, and nobody wanted it because it was too big and too loud. I picked it up and played a G chord, and I said, 'Mr. Shacklet, this guitar sounds like a church.' And he said, 'Son, for $35, it's yours.'" Grover Tull had not been a performer. He had not been a musician in any formal sense. He had never played in a band. He had never played at church, though the preacher had asked him twice. He had played on his porch for himself and for the tobacco field across the road, and for Opal when she was alive, and for the evening, and for the sound. He had known maybe 30 songs. He had played them in the same order most nights, starting with "I Saw the Light" and ending with "Softly and Tenderly." And he had played them the same way every time, with the same finger-picking pattern he had taught himself from a Mel Bay instruction book in 1954. He had never changed a string in his life until Emmett's mother, Opal, had bought him a set of Martin Marquise mediums at Shacklett's for Christmas in 1971, and after that, Grover had changed strings once a year, on Christmas morning, in honor of the gift. The guitar had been Grover's companion the way some men have dogs or pipes or rocking chairs. It had been the thing he reached for at the end of every working day. It had been the thing that told him the day was over and the evening had begun. Without the guitar, Grover would have been the same man, quiet, reliable, precise about his tobacco rows. With the guitar, he had been that man plus a sound that carried across the yard and into the road and down the block, and his neighbors had known it was 6:30 by the first chord, the way they knew it was noon by the courthouse bell. Emmett sat at the kitchen table that Wednesday morning with the guitar in front of him and the mechanic's estimate 3 inches from his coffee mug, and he did something he'd sworn he would never do. He put the guitar back in the canvas gig bag and drove Kenny Phelps's truck to town. A one-pawn sat on South 3rd Street between a Dollar General and a rent-a-center. The bell over the door jangled as Emmett stepped inside, carrying the gig bag by the broken strap. Tucker was behind the counter eating a gas station sausage biscuit and looked up after about 10 seconds. "Help you?" "I've got an old guitar, my daddy's. Was wondering—" "Let's see it." Emmett unzipped the gig bag and set the guitar on the glass counter, laying it flat on its back. Tucker wiped his hands on a napkin, set his biscuit down, and picked the guitar up by the neck with one hand. He turned it over. He looked at the back. He looked at the front. He strummed the dead strings once with his thumb. "Yeah, old acoustic. Martin looks like. Old Martins are hit or miss. This one's beat. Checking on the finish, crack in the pickguard, strings are dead, action's way high, 15, maybe $20. It's a Martin D something. My daddy bought it in 1953. He played it every—" "Sure, Pops." Tucker leaned the guitar against the side of the counter by the neck, letting the body rest on the linoleum. The bottom edge of the guitar touched the floor with a soft, woody thump. $15. I can't sell beat-up acoustics, man. Kids want electrics. Old guys want new Taylors. This is—" He waved his hand at the guitar the way a man waves at a fly. "This is garage sale." Emmett's jaw set. He put both hands flat on the counter. He thought about the timing chain. He thought about June in the oncology ward, the way the light had come through the window at 5 in the afternoon and caught her face, and the way she'd said, "Play me something, Emmett," and he'd had to tell her he didn't know how, and she'd said then hum, and he'd hummed in the garden while she held his hand. He thought about his father on the porch, G chord, the screen door, the iced tea. He did not pick up the guitar. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He stood there with both hands flat on the glass and his mouth closed tight, because the only other thing he could do was cry in front of a 22-year-old, and Emmett Tull had not cried in front of another human being since June's funeral in 2023. The bell over the door jangled again. A man came in, early 60s, lean, about 6 feet, with shoulder-length silver-gray hair pulled back in a ponytail, a neatly trimmed salt-and-pepper goatee, and small oval wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a black leather jacket over a blue chambray shirt, dark jeans, and brown cowboy boots that had been resoled at least once. He carried a battered brown leather gig bag backpack over one shoulder. There was a small gold pin on his jacket lapel that Emmett, if he'd looked closely, would have recognized as the logo of the American Guitar Foundation. He came 2 steps inside, glanced at the counter, and then he saw the guitar leaning against the side of the counter. He stopped walking. He stood perfectly still for what felt like a long time, but was probably 4 seconds. His eyes moved from the headstock to the body to the back and then back to the headstock. Then he looked at the abalone pearl binding along the top edge. His face changed. "Excuse me," he said. His voice was quiet and very calm, the calm of a man who is working very hard not to say what he wants to say at the volume he wants to say it. "Sir, is that guitar for sale?" Tucker looked up. "Old guy's selling. $15. The man did not look at Tucker. He looked at Emmett. "Sir, my name is Jack Renfro. I am the founder and senior appraiser of Renfro Vintage Instruments in Nashville, and I sit on the Authentication panel for Heritage Auction's Musical Instruments Division. I am in Paducah this week because I'm buying a banjo collection from an estate in Lone Oak. I came in here because—" He paused. "Because I always stop at pawn shops. Would you permit me to examine that guitar?" Emmett found his voice. "You're asking me?" "It's yours, isn't it? It was my daddy's." "Then yes, sir. I'm asking you, and I would ask you, please, to not let the body of that guitar touch this linoleum floor for one more second." Tucker straightened up and lifted the guitar off the floor by the neck. Jack Renfro was already moving. He set his gig bag backpack on the counter and unzipped it. He drew out a pair of folded white cotton archival gloves, a 10x jeweler's loop, a small LED maglite, a soft chamois, a small precision hygrometer, and a leather-bound notebook. He pulled the gloves on finger by finger. "May I?" Emmett nodded. Jack Renfro took the guitar from Tucker's hand the way a man takes a sleeping child from someone who doesn't know how to hold one. Both hands, one cradling the neck at the nut, one supporting the body at the lower bout. He laid the guitar face up on the chamois on the counter. He tilted the guitar under the fluorescent lights. He studied the top, the deep honey amber Adirondack spruce, the checking, the pickwear, the belt-buckle dent. He ran a gloved fingertip along the abalone pearl binding at the top edge. He turned the guitar over. He studied the Brazilian rosewood back. He studied the center seam. He studied the heel of the neck where it met the body. He turned the guitar back over. He shone the LED flashlight through the sound hole into the body cavity. He brought the loop to his eye and read the label inside, the paper label glued to the inside of the back, visible through the sound hole. He went still. He read it again. He shone the light at a different angle. He read it a third time. He set the flashlight on the counter. He took the loop away from his eye. He took off his oval wire-rimmed glasses, closed his eyes, opened them, put the glasses back on. He looked at Emmett. His voice had changed, not louder, quieter. "Mr. Tull? Emmett Tull. Mr. Tull. The label inside this guitar reads C.F. Martin and Company, Nazareth, Pennsylvania. Below the logo in the serial number field is the number 75269. He paused. "Mr. Tull, do you know what a D45 is?" "No, sir. My daddy called it his Martin, that's all." Jack Renfro nodded slowly. "Mr. Tull. In 1933, a singing cowboy named Gene Autry walked into the C.F. Martin factory in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, and asked them to build him the finest flat-top guitar they had ever made. Martin built him the D45, a dreadnought body with Adirondack spruce top, Brazilian rosewood back and sides, abalone pearl inlay on the binding, the headstock, and the fingerboard markers. It was the most ornate and the finest-sounding production acoustic guitar in the world. Martin made the D45 from 1933 to 1942, when they stopped production because of the war. In those 10 years, they made a total of 91 guitars. 91, Mr. Tull. In 10 years, then they stopped. The fluorescent tube over the door flickered. Serial number 75269 corresponds to production year 1939. This guitar is number 73 of the 91 pre-war D45s ever produced. Of those 91, approximately 68 are known to survive in private and institutional collections. This is one of them. Tucker's sausage biscuit sat on the napkin beside the register, untouched and getting cold. Mr. Tull, pre-war Martin D45s are, without exaggeration, the most valuable production acoustic guitars in the history of American instrument making. They are the standard against which every acoustic guitar ever made is measured. The last comparable example, I do a 1940 D45 in similar playing condition with similar checking and wear. Sold at Heritage Auctions in Dallas in 2019 for $312,000. He picked the guitar up again and held it in the fluorescent light. He turned it slowly. The abalone binding caught the light and threw small rainbows across the glass counter. This guitar has been played hard, by a man who loved it. The finish is checked. The pickguard is cracked. There's a belt-buckle dent on the lower bout that tells me whoever played this guitar played it standing or sitting with it in his lap every day for decades. The tuning machines have been replaced. Those are aftermarket Grovers, not the original open backs, which affects the value slightly. But the body is original. The top, the back, the sides, the neck, the bracing, the binding. All original. All 1939. He looked at Emmett. At professional appraisal through Heritage Auctions' Musical Instruments Division, with serial number verification from the Martin Guitar Company archive in Nazareth, this guitar would be valued between $250,000 and $320,000. Conservative estimate, $287,000. Nobody in the shop spoke. A truck downshifted on South 3rd Street, and the window rattled. Tucker cleared his throat. It took him 3 tries. I was going to say 50. I meant 50. Emmett didn't look at him. He was looking at the guitar on the chamois and thinking about Grover Tull on the front porch of the house on Jefferson Street at 6:30 on a summer evening in 1967. The iced tea sweating on the railing, the screen door open, the lightning bugs coming up over the tobacco field across the road, and the G chord, that G chord, ringing out into the Kentucky dusk like a bell in a church that had no walls. This guitar sounds like a church, Grover had said to Old Man Shacklet in 1953. And it did. It still did. It had sounded like a church for 91 years, and nobody, not Grover, not Emmett, not Old Man Shacklet, not any of the people who had walked past the porch on Jefferson Street and heard Grover playing Hank Williams in the evenings, had ever known that the church was worth $287,000. Grover hadn't needed to know. Grover had needed a guitar that sounded good. He had found one for $35. Jack Renfro handed Emmett his card. "Mr. Tull, take your time. Talk to your son. But please, sir, please, do not leave this guitar in this shop. And please, do not put it back in a canvas gig bag. I will leave you a hard case from my truck. No charge. Just, please." He went out to his truck. He came back with a black hard-shell guitar case, a proper one, with plush lining and brass latches. He opened it on the counter. He lifted the D45 with both gloved hands and laid it inside the case. He closed the lid. He fastened the latches. He handed the case to Emmett. Emmett took the handle in both hands. He stood there with the case at his side. He nodded once at Jack Renfro. He walked out past Tucker without a word. In the parking lot, sitting in Kenny Phelps's truck with the guitar case on the bench seat beside him, Emmett Tull held both hands on the steering wheel and cried for the first time since June's funeral. He called Grover Jr. that night. He told him the whole story. Grover Jr. drove down from Louisville at 5 the next morning. They sat at the kitchen table on Jefferson Street with the hard-shell case open between them and the D45 lying inside it, the Adirondack spruce catching the kitchen light. Grover Jr., who had sat at this same table as a boy doing homework while his grandfather played on the porch outside, ran one finger along the abalone binding and said very quietly, "Grandpa played this every single night." "Every single night," Emmett said. They called Jack Renfro at 9. The Martin Guitar Company archive in Nazareth, Pennsylvania, confirmed serial number 75269 as a D45, shipped to a dealer in Memphis, Tennessee in November 1939. The Memphis dealer's records, preserved at the Country Music Hall of Fame, showed the guitar sold new in December 1939 for $200 to a buyer whose name was illegible in the carbon copy receipt. It had resurfaced at Shacklet's Music in Paducah in 1951, consigned by an estate, priced at $40. Old Man Shacklet had dropped the price to $35 after 2 years on the wall. Grover Tull had walked in and played a G chord and walked out with it. Heritage Auctions acquired the guitar for their permanent collection through a 99-year family loan. The auction house paid the Tull family $279,000. The guitar went on permanent display at the Heritage Auctions Gallery in Dallas in April, in a climate-controlled case with the strings tuned to concert pitch and a small speaker system that played a recording of a D45 of the same vintage so visitors could hear what Grover had heard, and a placard, C.F. Martin, D45 acoustic guitar, 1939, serial number 75269. Number 73 of 91 pre-war D45s produced, 1933 to 1942. Purchased for $35 at Shacklett's Music, Paducah, Kentucky, in 1953 by Grover Tull, 1916 to 1995. Played on the front porch of the Tull family home on Jefferson Street, Paducah, every evening for 40 years. On loan from the family of Emmett G. Tull, Paducah, Kentucky. Grover Jr. drove his father to Dallas for the dedication. Emmett wore the dark suit he'd worn to June's funeral. He stood in front of the case and listened to the recording of a D45, not his father's D45, but one of its sisters, and the sound was the same. And for a moment he was 8 years old at the kitchen table with his math homework and the screen door open and the lightning bugs and the G chord coming through the screen from the porch. "You had the best guitar in the world, Daddy," Emmett said, quiet enough that only Grover Jr. heard him. "And you just played it." He paid for the timing chain. He paid the property taxes 3 years forward. He sent Grover Jr. $50,000 and told him to use it for the boys' school and not to argue. He set up a trust for his 2 grandsons. He bought a new truck, a 2024 Ford Ranger, the first new vehicle he had ever owned in his life. He bought June a new headstone with her full name and a line beneath that read, "Wife, Mother." She heard the music. A letter came from Old Man Shacklett's grandson in February, a man named Tom Shacklett, 71, still living in Paducah, who had read the story in the Paducah Sun. Tom wrote that his grandfather had told him once, decades ago, that the most beautiful guitar that had ever hung on the wall of Shacklett's Music was a big Martin with pearl trim that nobody wanted because it was too expensive at $40. His grandfather had dropped the price to $35, and a tobacco farmer had walked in and played 1 chord and bought it on the spot. His grandfather had said, "That man heard what I heard." That guitar was waiting for him. Emmett had the letter framed. It hangs on the wall beside the spot on the porch where Grover's chair used to sit. And the next Sunday morning, back home in Paducah, Emmett sat down at his usual booth at Kirchhoff's Bakery on Market House Square with his 2 oldest friends, Leroy Pace and Junior Whitlow, the way he had every Sunday for 22 years. Leroy looked at him over the rim of his coffee mug. "Heard you made the Sun, Emmett." "Heard that." "Martin guitar, huh?" "Martin guitar." Junior shook his head. $15. $15, Emmett agreed. The 3 of them laughed, the quiet, chest-deep laugh of old men who have lived long enough to know that the world rarely sees what matters, and that sometimes, if you wait long enough, it finally does. A kid in a pawn shop looked at that guitar and said $15. He didn't know. They never do. If stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel, because some things have hidden worth.